Hello and welcome to Political Paradigm. I am Terry Ikumi. My guest today is the former Vice President of the World Bank Africa region, former Minister of Education, and a former presidential candidate. My guest is Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. It's nice to see you, man.
It's really lovely to see you, Terry.
Really...
You look so well. Are you in Nigeria?
I can't respond to that, but absolutely I am. I must say that I followed your tweets and I found that you love football.
I certainly do. I mean, I was, indoctrinated into football by my dad. He used to take me to the National Stadium in Surulere in the days that I was just a little guy.
And then France. We both rooted for France.
We both rooted for France, and unfortunately they lost. But I did not even root for France as much as I was rooting for this African descendant. His father is from Cameroon, the Mbappe guy, Kylian. Incredible and prodigious talent. And so I really wanted him to be joyful after all that he gave to the game.
Sadly, we didn't get what we both wanted. Mm-hmm. But let's talk politics now. Right. Well, let me begin by saying that by this time in 2018, yes, I was having a conversation with you on hard copy at the time because you were a presidential candidate. Uh-huh. I must say that a number of people were quite disappointed, are still disappointed that you are not in the race. And if I may draw your attention, in addition to that, to the fact that in the race right now, 18 political parties, one female presidential candidate who is not as visible as you would expect at this level of the polity. It's disappointing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is very disappointing. I think that over time, we will have more women, really participate. But that would take a lot of important changes to the underlying structural issues, keeping the women away from politics. A principal thing that's keeping women away from politics is that, women consider the configuration of the political landscape to inherently set up a barrier against them. So there is a barrier to entry for women. If you looked at political parties, how many political parties have key officials being women? And it is really at the level of the political parties that a lot of the determinations of who is a candidate and who is not, are made. So the women just look at it and they see women who have gone ahead of them and how the political system has not in any way provided an equal playing field. And so they feel like it's not worth it. So I'm usually very grateful to women like, Ebere Ifendu, who does some training specific on women in politics. People like the elector as a campaign. We also have Abiola Akiode, the kinds of work they do to enable women, support women, and give them that sense of community for politics. Very important.
You have an experience in this. You've campaigned at the highest level of politics. You wanted to be president. And when you find women struggling to get in here, what do you tell them from your experience? Because we recall that in 2018, in the build-up, you walked away from the ACPN at the time, based on what you described as the antics of the leadership of the party. Now, you had gone through the process. You had experienced the politics. You had started your campaigns and then walked away from it. So what do you tell women who want to run for office based on your experience?
So number one thing I say to them is you have to be very clear about your values. You have to know what it is that you cannot negotiate. So once it shows up, you must be in a place to make a very quick decision. That, for example, was what I had to do. I was running not because I wanted to be called president. I wanted the title of being president. I was running not because I wanted there was some benefit to being president. No, I was running because I was tired of the failure that we were saying, now getting to the point where children who went to school were taken by terrorists, and 2 consecutive governments were not even saying that that was a no kind of issue, that was an issue that the entire country needed to be in one accord in saying not acceptable. It was, for me, a turning point in this country to see that the children of the poor, who consistently are being told that through education they can lift themselves and their families out of poverty, chose education, and it was entirely okay for all of us to behave as if being removed from that school system and not getting the education, but instead paying with their lives, was normal. So that for me was a turning point. The failures in governance had been issues that I touched on frequently, all the time, but that definitely was a tipping point. So I said to them, first, establish your values, and then second, the kind of due process, due diligence that I did as to the nature of the party that I was running on their ticket, perhaps do even much more than I did, because I did do due diligence. I saw that this party had resisted being co-opted into PDP, resisted being co-opted into APC in the previous years. It just kept saying it would stand on its own, go run for office. And these people were very, you should have seen the way they really put every effort into getting me to accept to run on their ticket, because there had been other parties that had also wanted me to run on their ticket. So the due diligence that I did, the women would have to do even much more than that.
I started off this conversation saying that there are people who are disappointed that you're not on the ballot. You have spoken passionately about what you had intended to do, which was the reason why you went into politics in the first place. So why are you not in this race?
In the 2019 race.
Exactly.
I get asked
2023.
this. 2023. The 2023 race, yes. So what I did was essentially to use the economic model of what a market space looks like for anything you call a good or a service. Because, politics is a good, it's a service. If there is a market for a good or a service, then there is a market for politics. Unfortunately, that market for politics is now distorted totally by the way that it is played on our continent, and it has been reduced to a series of transactions where people basically engage democracy for private benefit. So my own approach, my theoretical modeling was to say, if politics is seen as a service, then there is a market that is made up of the suppliers of that service and those who demand, the consumers of the service. And if that market is a competitive market, which is the best market that is beneficial to the larger number, then that market would have a regulatory system that ensures that the relationship between the supply side and the demand side would result in outcomes that are favorable to the larger number. So that meant my designing a research statement along the lines of, investigation on what I call the triangular pillars of democracy, where the electorate, that is the voters, are the demand side, and the politicians, the political class, are the supply side of that service, and then the regulatory side made up of legal frameworks, constitutional frameworks, as well as institutions like the INEC. And so by analyzing the the features that each of these three pillars show in any country's democracy and coming to conclusions on what those features look like against what the feature of a type of market would look like.
So what you're saying is you chose to work on fixing Nigeria's politics rather than participating in it as a candidate.
So the results of my research shows me that we make a big mistake to simply think that if we individually just run for office, then we're going to be able to go to good governance. What I want is politics that determines, that delivers good governance, right? So my research shows to me that even that if we don't fix politics now, that even by the year 2100, that is 2100, if there's something like that, 2100, how many years from now, maybe some 78 years from now, we would still be at the same spot, struggling to make the kind of transformational change in our economic growth and development. And that was pretty scary, because what it showed is that if we don't fix the supply side of our politics, the same time as we're fixing the demand side, the same time as we're fixing the regulatory side, and therefore having a complete structural transformation of the way that our politics is conducted, is done, and the outcomes that come out of our politics, you're not going to have the kind of good governance that we are looking for.
Let's take a look at this tripartite idea, our approach that you've taken to fix Nigerian politics. Let's begin with the aspect of the voters now. The idea for fixed politics with regard to the voters is a system designed to emerge voters who are economically productive, informed, active, engaged, and constitute a powerful electorate that cuts across the low and middle income class of voters.
You read the research.
Absolutely. And I've had conversations that have also questioned whether going into the elections, we could have a good voter turnout, but what's most important is having a good informed voter turnout. So what level of success or progress have you been able to make, considering that the elections are just 2 months away?
Well, we didn't do this research for 2023 elections. That's number one. So don't rush, all right? Because you see, what's been ailing us has been ailing us for almost 6 decades now, right? So our democracy has been very troubled. That's why it always caved and then would go to militarization. But at least in recent times, we've had a sustained period of democracy, right? Of elections. Now, the reason I said don't rush is that it's not like we switch on the light, just like that. No, it's not instant. It is something that is structural. It's something that is systemic. So it requires a very long-term approach to make sure that you are growing a politically influential electorate. And that requires that you should understand the electorate. When you look at the Nigerian or Liberian or Ghanaian electorate, the key segments are the low-income class. These ones are very faithful to coming out for elections. But they come out for elections not because they have any expectations from what the outcome of the elections will bring. No, election day is a day of transaction. They have been failed so often by the democratic process that because after the elections, they don't see any kind of accountability or result of governance that is produced by those they've voted for. So they've come to the place where, indeed, politics is a commodity. They trade on it on the day of elections with their thumb. And why are they doing this? They are doing this because their productivity is so low that their income is so poor. So any addition to that income on that day is sufficient to influence their voter behavior. So this low-income group, people who are middle class, like you and I, you and me, what we could do is we look at them and say, oh, why are they selling their votes? I mean, why are they selling their votes? They don't know that they are trading 4 years of their lives and that of their children. Well, this is elite rubbish. Because why I call it elite rubbish is that these guys, they are not at that point in time thinking about the morality. They are not even thinking of the 4 years that you're talking about because they don't have 4 years. They live for a day. Their income makes them live for a day. So the day of election is just one more day to survive. So economically, what you would say is that they are making rational choices. But are they making moral choices? No. Are they even making choices that in the medium to longer term would be beneficial to them? No. But do we understand why they are making those choices? Yes, because they know, they have seen it. The pattern is established that they would not get the benefit of the governance that should follow from their vote. So they've become cynical and they sell that vote in a transaction. So what it means is that for the low-income group, you need to think of how to move these people from where they are in loving to come out for elections, because they would trade their vote on that day, to a place where they can reasonably delay gratification because they are now much more politically literate. What we're seeing is a democracy that is a transaction between low-income class and corrupted political class will no longer be so. If your middle class gets into the electorate space as they should, based on the numbers that they are, it will begin to influence the quality of democratic choices. Then, if you did all of this, but they are still having to choose amongst a bunch of political rascals.
So that's exactly where I was going with this. So, this takes me to the conversation I had with Professor Ango Abdullahi, who is the convener of the Northern Elders Forum. And he said, based on what you said, also sort of corroborating what you said, because of the process and the crop of politicians we have, regardless of who emerges in 2023, Nigerians should brace up for the worst. Do you agree with him? Regardless of who emerges as president?
Yeah, I mean, there are many levels to that, right? So fundamentally correct, because even if you elected the most brilliant of persons, the most ethical of persons, the most capable of persons today, in today's Nigeria, Nigerians must brace up for a rough ride. The country is in tatters. The security institutions they barely exist. You have to completely it's not even reform. You have to transform what we have.
The entire
it's an
system.
Overhaul. Well, our security, people abroad are shocked that this is what Nigeria became in terms of security. Look at our economy. The thing that, for me, really tells the story of the state of our economy is, for me as an individual who's got knowledge of what economic policy is about, to watch the serial wrong economic policy direction that threw the country into the kind of place that it finds itself, in not having some critical reforms that has supported the growth of the economy and therefore a reduction in poverty levels. Instead, it has grown. You look at an institution like the central bank that has responsibility for monetary policy, and to have seen in a serial way many times that it was a miss in terms of the policy choice. You know that to get that back, to get central bank to sensible monetary policy is going to require a serious cleansing of the methods and approaches that it's taken all these years. Then you look at the matter of the educational system, the human capital development, health, education, and you look at our numbers. They resemble the numbers of the countries that we call conflict-affected states or post-conflict states. So when you look at all of these things in totality and our macroeconomic context within which the person who is elected would have to govern, and then the complete breakdown of any little bit of social cohesion or social capital that we used to have, my goodness. So even if the person were super, they would have to get the cooperation of the Nigerian people to mobilize ourselves for a rough ride. Before then, the benefits of making the right but tough choices of policies will begin to come in.
Will this rough ride spread across the 4 years? The first 4 years of the next president?
It might take up to that. The reason that it might take up to that is that, if we even use the model of what happened with the presidency of President Obasanjo, you know that in the first term, he really practically spent it trying to get the country, a country that was completely in tatters in terms of its social, political, and economic, state of affairs, status rather, and the first time was placating the different sides of the country with all kinds of agitations and all kinds of anger toward the instrument of government. So those political political consensus building and getting people to look at Nigeria from the perspective that they can still hold on to hope as Nigerians. That was literally President Obasanjo's first term. I remember that in those days, it was the reform that I was doing in due process, the public procurement reforms, and then the reform that was going on with the Bureau for Public Enterprises privatization agenda that was led by Mr. El-Rufai. Those were the key aspects of reforms that, really were going on. In a lot of many ways, that period was very political. But see what then happened by the second term. There was a readiness because they had come to the place where the country could look at the leader and say he was making an effort to bring everybody together. In the case of the next president, the issues are going to be even more desperate politically. Politically, because, people are not, I have never seen Nigeria be this way. I used to say that we needed to invest in transiting Nigeria from a country to a nation. Okay? Today, we don't even really have, in the minds of many people, a country. You have people who are looking at Nigeria as if to say, they've given up on Nigeria as a country, not even as, now let's be a nation. So there's a lot of work that is cut out for whoever is president. Even the best of a president would have to think in terms of the issues of the structural imbalances that we have in our polity. So our constitution and the kinds of change, the complete. I believe in the need for a a national conversation that would result in a completely new constitution. Candidates who are running for elections must tell the electorate the bitter truth. The bitter truth is that the country is not in a place for any president to immediately deliver results. I think what matters is that you have a president who actually understands the problems that would need to be solved and has an idea of how to go about solving it. Any candidate who is promising you instant results after 2023 elections is not being fair to you. So it is important that we should understand that citizens must be ready for the work that is ahead, because it's going to require everybody, working together to make this happen.
I don't know if you followed the ANAP NOI polls. One was released in September this year. Another has just been released. And the polls show, both polls have showed that Peter Obi is in the lead. As a matter of fact, the recent poll shows that he has a 10% lead ahead of the APC candidate, Bola Tinubu. We're not used to this. We're not used to a 3-4 horse race. We're used to 2-horse race. What's your reaction to that? What could be responsible for that?
So hold your thought on this question. I just want to complete the one around quality of politicians. So having identified why it is that you have what we call monopoly democracy in our continent, being that the political class has hijacked the political space and subordinate the common good to their personal and private interest. And you then say you want to correct it by producing a new set of political actors on a mass. You want to produce them at scale. So we then began the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, through which we call it the SPPG, through which we are raising a completely new set of human beings who are, from, average age 35. These are people who are already doing well in various works of endeavor. But guess who they are? They are people who are saying, enough. We cannot sit back and watch the country just decline every day because we're not getting the right public leadership. And the reason that this is important is that just having a wonderful president is not enough. You've got to have political class, meaning it has to cut across the spectrum of leadership of the politics of the country from the base all the way to the top. In the legislature and in the executive, you have to have them in the state, in the local government, at the federal level, so that you have the kind of momentum that is necessary for your political and public space to mostly make the right choices for the governance of your country. So having done that, on that question about the poll, what you should always worry about a poll is the methodology. Now, I haven't seen the result of the poll. I haven't actually, paid attention to this. I haven't seen it. I've heard you talking about it and a few other people. But in every poll, what should worry about is the methodology. Now, why should I have confidence in a poll? I should look at the past record of the pollster and the credibility that comes from the institution that is polling. So what I do see is that it is not actually a Tedu Peter Sides poll. It's something that's being done by the NOI poll. If you know anything, the NOI poll has been in existence for almost a decade now, right? And they've been polling in this country. So it's not a fly-by-night, set of pollsters. So I would take whatever they bring out seriously, because I do know that their methodology, except if they've changed it, was always a global standard methodology, because they partnered with Gallup polls, the famous Gallup polls. They were their technical partners in establishing that poll organization. So that's one. The second part of it is that polls are instructive, but anything could happen. Anything could happen. I think that what the poll just helps you do is for people to see where the sentiments are going. Now, if the poll is giving you a lead and you go and relax, then be careful that you don't do that, all right? If the poll is saying that you're not in the lead and you say, I must be getting something wrong. So someone like, these two other political parties that have not accepted that they would come for debates, a real debate, not a conversation, not these ones where we are, coddling them. No, they need to come for a debate. So maybe the day that the APC presidential candidate says he would come for a debate, or the PDP presidential candidate says he's ready to go for a debate, and then the Labour candidate says, I am ready to come for a debate, maybe on the day of the debate, if you went back and polled, you would see a different set of results. We have to keep these kinds of tradition because they actually help to improve the quality of choice.
So there's a likelihood that the results of this poll suggest that one particular candidate is talking more to the people than the other.
Yes, and it matters. It matters because when you run away from public debate, you say you want to govern me, you want to govern us, but we're asking you to come for a debate, and you say, no, I don't have to debate. I am doing town halls. But your town halls is basically a well orchestrated and organized, so you have those who already, you don't even need to be talking to those ones because they already believe in you. They are your chorus singers, right? They are already chorusing your greatness. So that's not it. If you're talking to them and you think you're talking to the electorate is saying to you, no, you're not yet talking to us. And what is very vexing about this contemptuous way in which the political candidates are treating the interest of citizens for a debate is that citizens in this moment are so disgusted by their political class. So they don't believe in them naturally. It's therefore important that you should invest as much as possible to engage with the electorate. Because through that engagement, there are many things that may be, suppositions, they may just be rumors, unresearched, but there's nothing more persuasive than data. We say in God we trust. Everyone else come with your data. So the political candidates, the presidential candidates need to come with their data. When they come with their data by agreeing to do debates, certainly you would see that some of them will gain more people, some of them will lose people because the people are weighing the three of them and saying, I think this fellow just catches my own interests more than the others.
I think that is linked to the number of undecided voters, the percentage of undecided voters from the NY polls, which shows that 29% of people are still undecided. Mm-hmm. There are two ways to look at it. It's a concern.
Wow, you said only, I would think that it's probably more than 29, but 29 is fairly okay.
That poll also showed that 29% undecided, 23 refused to disclose.
Okay, so that's a large number because 29 and 23, that already gives us 52%. 52%.
And would this translate to voter apathy at some point? Do you think?
Well, in a situation where, the last election, what was the rate
voter
of
turnout?
Voter turnout. I think it was something around 32%
yes.
or thereabout, which is pretty low. I mean, it compares badly with global average of about 50 to 60%, right? So if we don't unlock those two groups in that poll, then it would mean that we would still be struggling somewhere between 30 and 40% participation, which would not be really good for democracy. So what I think is that with this kind of result, all parties, should really go to the drawing table and say to themselves, what do we do with this number? What is this number saying to us? Then they have to do an evaluation of their campaign style so far. Are we reaching the people we should reach? Are there people who have tuned out completely, and we need to bring them back. We need to get them excited. There are many Nigerians who have become jaded. They simply have come to the place where they say, nothing good is ever going to come out of this, so I don't care. But we need to not have them be like that, because that's a dangerous place to be. That level of trenchant cynicism, creates the basis for the even more hijack of power by just a few people, so that you will now be a super monopoly democracy instead of being a competitive democracy that would ultimately produce sound policies, build the right institutions, make the right choices of investment in the public goods and services that you need as a citizen in order to thrive in the things that you do. We must unlock the people who are not showing interest. We must unlock, we must provide more information. Actually, that data on the ones who are undecided, if I were polling, I would say, okay, take that 29% and ask them a question specific to the matter of whether the candidates are not coming across enough with information.
So
do they want debate? How else do they want the candidates to support their decision?
There's an additional information or data to that, which could be the reason. So we find, based on the polls, that 38% of these
29
undecided voters are women.
Are women?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's a higher number than the male.
What's the number for the
21%?
21%.
So apparently the rest of them did not disclose.
Well, if we take what we know about women, women give sufficient time. They process in a more deliberate way. So their husband can come and say, I've already decided who I will vote for. And the woman is saying, I haven't completely decided. I have seen some things that are good in this one, but I'm still watching the other one to see. So that, And
this could be based on, the kind of, perhaps the marginalization or the level of attention not being paid to women, and perhaps they want to know what the candidates will be offering to women. They do, a lot
of them. And one of the things that I find very fascinating is how in this middle-class irresponsibility that we say, the men are more irresponsible. Middle-class irresponsibility is actually displayed more by the men. The women are more interested now in engaging the political system for accountability. The women are sort of saying, you know what, our children are suffering. Well, I don't want any. Haven't you seen some of those times when women, you just see a woman, and this one is anecdotal, but it is developed. These are the developments that are important to observe. You're seeing more women take a bold stand and say, you men, you have not given us the kind of governance. They are more outspoken now about the political process. So that's quite is an important indicator of the level of engagement that women want to see of their political campaigners. So I would say that, look, rather than try to rubbish the polls, what people should really do is take the best lessons out of it. Don't rest on your laurels or either. Don't sort of say, oh, we're winning. Because, these things are not perfected until they are done.
Just as we wind down, as a former Minister of Education, what sort of plans do you expect to hear from the candidates with regards to how they will address the issue of education, which is a big concern in Nigeria, because largely Nigeria has not still been able to meet up with the recommendation for budget allocation to education.
I wish it were just the budget allocation that we're even dealing with. We're dealing with more fundamental issues. You know that when I was Minister of Education, you know, we did say to the country, and that was on the basis of analysis. We gathered a lot of evidence to show that, the data telling the story. And we said that education was in crisis, not even crisis, meaning multiple crisis, you know. So, and then we went ahead to begin to identify the solutions. When I was Minister of Solid Minerals, the number of solutions I needed to work on to reform the sector were 107. I called it Agenda 107 items. By the time, including the law, making the new law, doing the airborne geophysical survey of the country, doing the reform of the ministry, the sector, preparing the corporation, co-corporation, mining corporation for privatized. So very tough reforms, 107 of them. But in education, guess the number of reforms that we analytically identified we needed to do? 436. 436, and we went down on them and started doing them.
At what level of education? Every level?
All the phases, because you can't, education is a system. You can't simply say, universities are not working, then you go to the rooftop when there is the base. Whatever is happening in the university system is coming from the base. And so a very important aspect that I would love to hear a candidate for office really pick on is what we now know with latest data, and it's a global data. 9 out of every 10 African children are not achieving basic foundational literacy and numeracy skills. That is terrible. Gosh. So it means they are in the school, but they are not learning anything. If you cannot have the foundational literacy and numeracy skills by the age of 10 compared to your counterparts in the rest of the world, it's a predictor of poverty. It's a predictor of a life that will struggle. So learning outcomes, the learning, what we call it is learning poverty, is a crisis, major crisis that we have to address in the country. So a presidential candidate who gets it and knows that we have to start from the base. We have to start from the base, because that base is the feeder for what happens in secondary. What some of the people say, technical and vocational education. Well, it turns out that a child who does not acquire the right foundation at the right proficiency level at the foundational levels will struggle even with technical and vocational. So that is a fundamental thing that I want to say, because it would then help in all the other phases, because in that reform, you had to look at that foundational, and at that time, we actually saw a bit of this, not what we're saying now. So we were dealing with out-of-school children, which is worse now. I don't know if you saw the UNESCO result for Nigeria. It is, my goodness, did I see 20 million or something like that? That's awful, because at the time I was Minister of Education and I saw about 6.7 or so million, and I thought, my goodness, this is scary. We can't have this. And we launched a program to attack it, especially using the instrument of UBEC. By the one session that coincided with my time as minister, we were able to remove 500,000 from the street or from home to go into the school system. Imagine if we stayed on that course and then instituted the mechanisms that were working at that time. So we have to look at these out-of-school children, but in looking at out-of-school children, there is a more fundamental problem that the current investment, which is why I said to you, don't quickly go to the percentage of the budget going to education. First, fix the anomaly in what is being provided. There are two critical issues: quality of teachers and quality of teaching. So this issue of pedagogical structure. So if you don't have structured pedagogy and you're just serving children, they are going to just keep being passed into the next level with no capacity to read with comprehension. They can't read and with comprehension, with meaning, right? So a president that I would vote for better be the president that understands this, because if this is a predictor of poverty and we have this level of multidimensional poverty on our hands, then the first place I want to be addressing is this issue.
Just before we go, you've maintained your position that the CBN has been politicized. The CBN has some new monetary policies. It's redesigned the Naira notes, some of the Naira notes. It's also adjusted the cash withdrawals over the counter. And the CBN insists that these policies were well thought out. Politicians fear that this could be targeted at them. There are those who believe that this policy will address the issues of terrorism, financing, and also address vote buying on election day. What do you make of all these?
So I think that the fundamental thing is that the central bank is pivoting everyone toward a cashless society. That's a desirable goal. It is desirable. But the issue is you don't do those kinds of policies in a panic. I mean, there have been times that it tried to do something on this, and then it rolled back. I think it must have been up to 3 times that it put a date, and then it had to, roll back. Then it needs to sort of ask itself, what are the factors that are constituting a barrier to people being excited to go cashless? You have to be very evidence-based in solving these problems. What we have said of the human being is that you actually don't need to force people to do things that are in their self-interest. That's what we call incentive, right? So in terms of a cashless society, you can get people who look at this as burdensome to carry cash around the place. You can get them to be excited about this by the way you design the policy and the timing that you give to the policy, the way that you ensure that some of the rigidities that may make it difficult for you to get the policy in a one fell swoop kind of moment ends up in a phasing and a contextual nuance of the different segments within your society. I have heard people sort of say that, the poor people, after all, don't need the kind of amount that you're talking about because they are not even earning it, and, such like.
Yeah, the CBN says that 94% of the transactions are below this withdrawal limits. Mm-hmm. Does that not hold water?
Mm-hmm. So that's okay to put it that way. What I do know, though, is that the key economic activities of the country is the informal sector. And that informal sector would need to be given an incentive to migrate to the formal systems, because that's how we can then increase their productivity.
So basically,
but what they are doing is, the more you put all these quick kinds of policy measures that you give, almost like a fiat kind of thing, what would happen is you would have more informalization, and more informalization. It then goes contrary to where you're trying to push the country to. If you know the amount of cash that these informal sector people move in a given day, we need to be thinking of these kinds of solutions not from the perspective of the few, really, I would stand behind anybody who wants to punish our very rascally political class. I would stand with them 110%. But we always have to be careful that we don't, because of a few, make policies that then hinder the larger number of it. Yes, and create unintended consequences. You have to be clear what's the weight of the problem that you're trying to solve in relation to many other problems that will be created. So why should the CBN dabble into the issue of using monetary policy to solve vote buying?
The CBN hasn't said that this policy is to address vote buying. It's clearly stated that this policy has nothing to do with the politics. It's just a decision that was well thought out.
I am very well, I consider a well-intended. I don't immediately think they want to be ill-intended. That's why I'm not thinking it is to catch politicians or to do anything. That's why I said if it were to catch them, I would probably...
You know why this kind of conversation is coming out? Is because the bulk of the people speaking out against this are politicians.
Yeah, but they've always been the ones that can speak out. Look, people are busy trying to earn a living. So they will figure a way to just ignore CBN because they just look at them and say they are all the same thing.
Doctor.
Right? So people are very busy earning a living. So they are leaving them to do their talking. But my worry is this matter of the unintended consequences. You can't push people more and more into informalization. Our informal economy really costs us too much because it would reduce the speed of our achieving the kind of productivity that will make us competitive globally.
Dr. Ezekwesili, I'd like to thank you very much. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Terry.
Maybe if I ask you whether what sort of adjustments you're seeing and your interest now, you may have to return to politics actively. I don't know if that's...
But I am in politics.
I
haven't, would I run, that whole thing of would I run for office yes. In some
Anytime
time?
Soon?
I have no such plans at this time in my life because I sort of feel like we have to really mobilize the society and address the root. Look, I think people are hoping that a Messiah would come and then everything would... No. Our democracy is our business to correct. It's the anomaly, the breach in our democracy is waiting for us to correct it. When we correct it, Terry, people will go into politics, run for office, and there will be tough debates. There will be tough, contest of ideas. But it would make it a competitive democracy, not a monopoly democracy, and not just even the enlightened monopoly. But it is really low level, low quality, monopoly democracy.
I'd like to thank you once again. Dr. Ezekwesili is a former World Bank Vice President, Africa Region. She's a former Minister of Education, and she's also a former presidential candidate who is now focusing on fixing Nigeria's politics.
I am, I keep saying to you folks, I do many things after all the formats that you just mentioned.
Well, there's a lot of formats. Right? You wouldn't blame us.
Yeah, that's fine. I've done all those things, but I've put them behind me. And so I am currently the Senior Economic Advisor of the Africa Economic Development Policy Initiative. I am the founder and chair of both Fixed Politics and the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. I am also the president of the Human Capital Africa.
You have you have a broad portfolio. I don't know.
Stop the former.
We almost can't keep it anymore, but I thank you very much for your time. Well, that's Political Paradigm. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to remind you that you can catch this episode and previous ones on YouTube. Simply search Political Paradigm and also go to channelstv.com for more. I'm Terry. Call me Merry Christmas, and I wish you a prosperous New Year. Goodbye.